Welcome, readers and writers, back to another spoiler-free book review. Today, we're going to be talking about J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring. Tolkien? Is it? Can someone tell me how to say it? Everybody says it differently. I think it's Tolkien. That sounds best Tolkien. But the guy was a linguist, and he might be turning over in his grave. But so before we get into things, as always, the full-length kind of spoiler-free breakdown discussion is linked in the description down below. If you want access to that, writing streams, the ability to possibly get your own short story published as an audiobook, feel free to check out the Storytellers Guild linked below. So, The Lord of the Rings. Obviously, legendary. The Fellowship of the Ring, the first book in the series. I was a big fan of the movies growing up, so I watched the movies, or more and more of the movies, because I started when I was really young. Throughout my whole childhood, but I kind of fake read the books for like clout among my friends, but never properly done it. And so in this reading journey, I was like, look, I have to read. Obviously, I have to read The Lord of the Rings. It's the foundation of modern fantasy as we understand it, and it's really dope. So I got the Andy Serkis audiobook, which if you didn't know he did an audiobook of it, phenomenal. Please go check it out. His narration is like 10 out of 10. It's incredible. I've listened to a lot of audiobooks. His narration's mind-blowing. I did it, sat down, and listened to it. And I really liked it. The Fellowship of the Ring is a great book. Obviously, there are a lot of differences from the movies. I think at its heart, at its soul, if you want to really go there, it still is the same. It's a great adaptation. I honestly think that is a topic for a much longer and very different video to really talk about, like book-to-movie adaptations, whether it's Lord of the Rings, Dune, whatnot. But I feel like I had to acknowledge it because I was a movie fan even before I was a book fan. Yeah, this book was fantastic, man. It just, the prose, the way it was written, it's incredible. Tolkien is a master. He's obviously a linguist. He's just classically trained, and you can see it. There were so many sentences in this book that were scribbled down on a piece of paper worthy. And for a dummy like me, that's a common sign that a book is well written. If I'm going like, wow, that was so cool, or like even like, wait, what exactly does that mean? Let me play that back again because that was really well done. That's great prose. The prose of this book were phenomenal. Now, obviously, it's an older book and it's done in a different way. I really liked the way that it was done, but it is done. What he's doing is not the same as a Witcher book or some more modern fantasy. It is broader. It is a little bit more epic, and it harkens back to fairy tales, to epic poetry. That's very apparent in the prose. That's very apparent in the pacing and the characterization. Even obviously the point of view. We talk about this. I think I've mentioned this in every single review I've done on this channel. But the character POVs, obviously he's jumping all over the place. Third person omniscient as opposed to third person limited, which is kind of the common style for today. But I thought it was just overall incredible. I mean, just the world of Middle-earth alone, which is something that I think a lot of us take for granted, even if you're not a fan of these books or The Lord of the Rings at all, because Middle-earth was such a fundamental building block for what we understand as elves and orcs and dwarves and just modern fantasy, for D&D, for World of Warcraft, for all of these things that, at least one of them that you guys in the audience are involved in, it was all Tolkien. It was from him. It was him taking this fairy tale lore and kind of formalizing it. And to read this and think about that as I read or listened to this book, it's incredible. Like, I don't know. It was one of those things where, to me, there was no overhype. It was like, yes, this man is a master and he deserves all of the praise he's gotten. There are aspects that I prefer because of kind of the changing and trends of literature and whatnot. But just sitting down and reading the prose, looking at the world, we're not even going to get to the characters of the plot yet. He's a master. Like, this is like a fantasy history book. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I've read some dope history books, and that's what this reminded me of, where it was just this broad, fascinating, colorful thing, this journey that you're taken on, and you hear about the poetry and the history and the ballads and the different creatures, and it like brings your imagination to life. And I just think he did a fantastic job at that. Now, I think that on the flip side, that is maybe where you could complain. There were times where I think pacing-wise, it dragged a little bit, or things were a little bit over-described. I wonder if that's just because I've seen the movies, and so I have a clearer idea, and I'm kind of like, I know what happens next, let's get there. Or if that's just the nature of the thing, but I wanted to acknowledge that. There are times where it dragged. Bombadil, it dragged a little for me. I liked the idea of him. I didn't hate his inclusion, even though I'm a movie fan, but towards the end of Bombadil, I was like, okay, we can move on. The characters were fascinating. Once again, I mean, I just read Dune and Ursula K. Le Guin and now Lord of the Rings, and I feel like they're all kind of older books, and so they have this older kind of style as far as like the third person omniscient. But I marvel at all three of those books because they do such a fascinating job of characterization, and The Fellowship of the Ring is the exact same, right? You're not always in these characters' heads. It's told in a little bit more flowery speech, and yet I think Tolkien is able to deliver really, really compelling and complex characters. Frodo is a great protagonist. Yes, he's a hero, and he's kind of your straight shooter, but he's done in a way that I haven't quite seen before, and there's a lot of subtlety in kind of his weaknesses or his strengths that I think Tolkien brings out in a fascinating way. The Fellowship as a whole, it's just a great dynamic. I mean, like, I don't want to get into spoilers if you haven't read the book, but all of the kind of cast of characters that are involved in the story, A, who doesn't love a big cast of characters, but B, Tolkien does such a great job of, in a very small amount of time, without us knowing everything about their history, doing a really good job of bringing out their interests, their wants, their desires, why their characters are motivated here, their kind of general, like, feeling and vibe and tone. He doesn't even do a lot of description. Like, there are characters that I know what they look like, or I think I know what they look like from the movie. Tolkien never describes them. But he does this really cool thing, I think, which if it's done wrong, it's really try hard. Like, I've tried to do this in my writing, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it absolutely flops. Tolkien does this thing where he just makes you feel. He won't describe a character. He won't say, like, oh, he was wearing green pants. He'll just make you feel like the vibe of this guy and the vibe of a guy who would wear green flowery pants. And that's really cool, I think. So it's not just this tedious, like, nah, and then he wore a belt buckle and a blah, blah, blah. It's like, nah, that would be tedious. And I think that, Tolkien is flowery and he's extensive, but he's never does that. It's always beautiful. It's always this like prose and feeling and kind of, and that's really cool. So yes, I think The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, it lives up to the hype. I mean, it really does. If it's a lot for you to read, listen to the audiobook. Circus brings it to life. It's just absolutely incredible. So I'm going to give this book an 8 out of 10. I cannot wait to finish the trilogy, obviously The Two Towers and The Fellowship of the Ring. As always, feel free to let me know what you guys thought of the book in the comments down below. Let me know what other books you guys want me to read. Like, I'm right in the middle of Mistborn, and I'm right in the middle of The Fellowship of the Ring. So I feel like I'm just living like the fantasy dream, being able to read these masterpieces from very different eras and very different styles for the first time ever. As always, thank you guys just for being here. Thank you for watching. If you do want access to the full-length reaction as well as all the other perks of the Storytellers Guild, feel free to check out the link down below. Keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you guys next time.